Welcome, everyone, to the 9th Annual Society of Creation Conference. I'm Gary Locklair. I'm Professor of Science and Computer Science at Concordia University, Wisconsin. And along with Dr. Joel Heck, I'm one of the co-founders of the Concordia University System Society of Creation. It's great to see you here. As a college professor, well, you've probably had teachers before. You know full well that I would talk even if there's nobody else around. But it is so meaningful. And I'm so thankful for all of you being here and participating in our 9th annual conference. My chosen subject is the origin of life, positive creation evidences. We're going to see if this works. I want to show you a little video from, this is David Bolinsky. Unfortunately, he's a brilliant medical illustrator, but he is an evolutionist. I'm going, oh, darn. Here I thought that I was all ready.
The body you are randomly assigned at birth shouldn't
Now we
determine.
got to see man.
An ant in relative size. You can run the movie, please. But these machines that power the inside of the cells are really quite amazing, and they really are the basis of all life. But because all of these machines interact with each other, they pass information to each other, they cause different things to happen inside the cell, and the cell will actually manufacture the parts that it needs on the fly from information that's brought from the nucleus by molecules that read the genes. And no life, from the smallest life to everybody here, would be possible without these little micro machines. In fact, it would really, in the absence of these machines, have made the attendance here, Chris, really quite sparse. This is the FedEx delivery guy of the cell. This little guy is called a kinesin, and he pulls a sack that's full of brand new manufactured proteins to wherever it's needed in the cell, whether it's to a membrane, whether it's to an organelle, whether it's to build something or repair something. And each of us has about 100,000 of these things running around right now inside each one of your 100 trillion cells. So no matter how lazy you feel, you're not really intrinsically doing nothing. So what I want you to do when you go home is think about this and think about how powerful our cells are, and think about some of the things that we're learning about cellular mechanics. And once we figure out all that's going on, and believe me, we know almost 1% of what's going on. Once we figure out what's going on, we're really going to be able to have a lot of control over what we do with our health, with what we do with future generations, how long we're going to live, and hopefully we'll be able to use this to discover more truth and more beauty.
The wonders and the miracle of the living cell. Unfortunately, Mr. Bolinsky, who did this wonderful animation there, believes that this all came about naturally, spontaneously, in the absence of a creator. When I talk about creation, I like to focus on what I call positive creation evidences. We could easily come up with many reasons why a cell could not arise naturally and spontaneously over time in the absence of any kind of design. But I feel it's better if we focus on presenting the positive case for creation rather than the negative case against evolution. This is one of my themes. It's better to present the positive case for creation rather than the negative evidences against evolution. Why is that? Can I illustrate that for you? How would you feel? Let me share with you a story of two couples that I know, Zeb and Martha, Zeke and Mabel. They got together after a long time. They haven't seen each other in years. They lived in different places in different states. So they get together and Zeb says, Zeke, it's great to see you. We're both huge sports fans. What's your favorite team now, Zeke? And Zeke says, my favorite team is the Chicago Bears. Zeb says, the Bears? Well, the Bears, that's the worst team in the NFL. The Bears have a bunch of drug addicts and felons on their teams. Don't you know the song, The Bears Still Stink? Well, while this is going on, Martha and Mabel are having a discussion, and Martha says, Mabel, I know you love hobbies. What's your hobby right now? And Mabel says, oh, Martha, I discovered something that I just love, cross-stitching. And Martha says, cross-stitching? That's for dolts. What a simplistic, simple-minded. How would you feel if when you shared something that was important to you, if you were immediately attacked? By the way, did I tell you the rest of the story? So after Zeb berates Zeke about this, Zeb says, you know, Zeke, the Chicago Bears are sort of like the United States Postal Service. Neither delivers on Sunday. Yes, that's how Zeke, Mabel, and we feel when we are attacked. An attack is not a good way to win friends and influence people. The first aspect of apologetics is to listen. It's easy to respond. And I know I've done this too in the creation evolution debate. Evolution? How could you possibly? The first thing we should do as apologists is listen. Allow the person to state their case, listen to it, and then rather than attacking, let's provide a positive alternative. Charles Darwin, 175 years ago, wrote On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, subtitled The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Survival. It'd be easy to attack evolution, it'd be easy to attack Darwin. Darwin had no clue of the origin of the living cell. There was one paragraph in this huge book where he imagined perhaps there was a warm little pond somewhere. Oh, interesting thing happened in the Cincinnati Zoo. Did you hear about this a couple months ago? The zookeeper went into the orang cage and there was an orangutan. It had in one hand Darwin's The Origin of Species, and in the other hand had the Bible. Apparently, the orang was reading both of these books. The surprised zookeeper said, what in the world are you doing? And the orangutan said, well, I'm trying to figure out, am I my brother's keeper or am I my keeper's brother? You know, when it comes to evidences, when it comes to understanding origins, some people claim all you do if you accept creation, or if you're a Christian who accepts creation, some claim that all you do is provide negative arguments against evolution. Well, let's provide some positive arguments for creation. But here's one thing to tuck away in the back of your mind. Any argument, any piece of data, any evidence cuts both ways. It can be a positive argument for our side, It can also serve as a negative argument against the other side. So because any evidence cuts both ways, much of what we're involved with here is how we present the evidence, how we present our arguments. And by the way, you may have noticed that I keep talking about evidence. In the world of origins, I don't like to use the word fact. There is neither fact nor scientific proof when it comes to origins. You see, the origin of life is something that happened in the past. I cannot use the standard scientific tools of observation and experimentation to uncover issues that happened in the past. So because origins happened in the past, we use a different kind of science, a forensic science, an investigatory science. What happens here in origins with creation is very similar to what happens in a court of law. We make our case. We have a very strong case, but we are presenting evidence. Now, what I want us to think about is, how can we present the evidence to an honest skeptic? There are some hardcore evolutionary atheists that frankly will not do any good to talk to about this. Their minds are so closed, they are so entrenched in evolutionary philosophy that they can't think in any other way. But what about the honest skeptic? How can we convince them? By the way, some of you may know that this is Chuck Norris, and my colleague, Dr. Kevin Anderson, suggested that I entitled this talk, Chuck Norris Takes Down Those Evolutionists. But see, I didn't want to do that. It'd be too easy. And I would much rather phrase this in a positive sense. Oh, and if you don't know about Chuck Norris, he is kind of an interesting person. Did you know that Chuck Norris can lift a chair one-handed while sitting on it? Okay, I have to laugh at these. Thank you. Let's talk about evidence again. I mentioned that any evidence cuts two ways. It could be positive for my model and also negative of the other model. Here's a classic optical illusion. Some of you have seen this before. What do you see here? Well, some of you may see what you think is an old lady. If you see an old lady, I don't know, hopefully you can see my mouse pointer on the screen here. Sometimes I try to annotate, but then all of a sudden things go bad. So she's kind of looking down this way. So here's her huge nose, here's her mouth, her chin down there, and a little bit of her eye up here. She looks down this way. Others you may see a younger woman. She is looking away from us. Here is her dainty nose. Here's her eyelash. This is her ear. This is her chin. Here's her choker collar on her neck. Optical illusions illustrate this concept that any evidence can cut two ways. Rather than phrasing the evidence as anti-evolution, which again is easy to do, I would rather phrase it in a positive creation sense. I believe that's more winsome, and it allows you to both listen and have a conversation with the interested, honest skeptic. Okay, here's my major point. If you remember nothing else from this presentation, I want you to recall this. Creation is reasonable. The creation model is a reasonable explanation for the origin of life. I've heard people lambast creation using all kinds of rude, crude, and vulgar terms. Oh, creation, that's stupid. That's ridiculous. That's insane. That's moronic. That's actually, creation is a reasonable explanation for the origin of life. I'm going to show that to you with the evidences that I'll present. There's a verse that Paul wrote to the church at Philippi. It's Philippians 4, verse 5. And I love the way that the ESV translates the verse. Philippians 4:5 says, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Greek word that's used there is translated in other ways, but it really means gentle respect. Christians, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. All right, let's talk about the origin of life. First of all, from a creation standpoint, how did God do it? As a Christian who is also a scientist, if you asked me, where did life come from? I would tell you it was created by the triune God. Now, if you ask me, how do you do it? What's the mechanism? First of all, I have to freely admit, I don't know. Sorry, I'm not God. Yet, there are some hints, both in God's word, scripture, and God's world, science. This is how I usually phrase it in a nutshell. How did God do this? God created life as matter, stuff, with teleonomy. Teleonomy, huge word. By the way, don't look it up in Wikipedia. They don't understand it. Teleonomy is information content. And we'll see how this plays out. Guess what? Life is stuff. It's matter. It's all those little molecular machines you saw in the video that's inside all the 100 trillion cells in your body. It's stuff, and it's something else. It's information content. So what I would like to do is I would like to share with you a few scientific evidences. If somebody asked you, hey, do you really believe that God created life? You can say, yes, I do. And here are a few reasons, or maybe just one reason why I believe so. What I'm saying is, in addition to God's word, God's world, science, provides an abundance of evidences. When I'm talking to a skeptic, and I say, the Bible says, a skeptic will often say, I don't accept the Bible. So if I can say scientific investigation points to this, now they're willing to listen. My ultimate goal is to get them to the true God and to take a look at his word. But these scientific evidences are designed to remove the stumbling blocks that people have put in their own mind against the creation model of origins. So today I'm going to list for you 6 evidences. There's no quiz. You don't have to remember all of them. But I'm hoping that 1 or maybe 2 of these will resonate with you. You can say, yeah, I really like that. I'm going to read a little more about that. And I'm going to keep that in my pocket such that the next time I'm talking with somebody, after I listen to what they say regarding evolution, I can say, but have you considered this? Evidence 1, the law of biogenesis. First formulated in its modern sense by this Christian creationary scientist, Louis Pasteur. In its simplest form, the law of biogenesis says life only comes from life. All scientists accept this today. Life only comes from life. I'll say this in a little bit, but just so you know what's the interpretation, what this is saying in a positive sense is that originally life must have come from a living God. Here's a quote from Pasteur. The more I study nature, the more I stand amazed at the work of the Creator. Louis Pasteur, by the way, saw no conflict between science and Christianity. In fact, that he believed that science brings people closer to God. In his work as a scientist, he saw evidence of wisdom and design, not randomness and chaos. Louis Pasteur buying his first quart of pasteurized milk. Many people consider Louis Pasteur, Christian creationary scientist, to be one of the greatest biologists, immunologists of all time. His work is first rate. He solved the mystery of rabies and helped to produce one of the first vaccines. He dealt with cholera, anthrax, silkworm diseases. He also was involved in fermentation and understanding that process, both with wine and beer. It's really his work that set the stage for modern biology, especially modern organic biology. His theoretical and practical contributions to science are mammoth. Law of biogenesis, life only comes from life. So when it comes to a scientific evidence, it's important that we provide the interpretation. Again, I'm going to focus on the positive, but I think most folks have heard and see the chemicals produce a living cell. That's correct. I got a little note saying my tin can internet dropped out for a second. Sorry. That is correct. How could this possibly happen? But I think much stronger is to phrase it this way. Originally, life had to have had a living source. There must have been a living God to create life. We know that inanimate objects don't spring into existence with a magic hat. Now, if we could just find the hat that Frosty wore. Evidence one, the law of biogenesis. Living cells must have originally had a living origin. My second evidence is the uniqueness of life. As far as we know today, in the third decade of the 21st century, life appears unique to Earth. In all the universe, we only have absolute evidence for life in one place in the entire universe, and that's on planet Earth. Many of you know this. NASA and their missions to Mars. Originally, the first Viking missions to Mars in the 20th century and the 19th century landed biological laboratories on the surface, scooped up stuff, put it together. What was the purpose? They were looking for life on Mars. Today, the Perseverance rover and its drone helicopter. What are we doing? NASA is very clear. Look on their website. Our goal is to discover evidence of life on Mars. We are spending billions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, looking for either life or evidence of life on Mars. Now, just so you know, by the way, they won't find any. Chuck Norris proved there is no life on Mars. That wasn't the case before his first space expedition, though. What's the interpretation of life appears unique to Earth? Well, here's the interpretation. If it is true that life only exists on Earth, it supports the idea of design, plan, and purpose. The fact that planet Earth and life are special. Anything that deals with design, plan, purpose, and specialness relates directly to the concept of a creator that is a designer. Third evidence, complexity. If you couldn't catch it by that little video, or if you haven't done any chemistry or biochemistry lately, living cells are immensely complex. They have an attribute that engineers and computer scientists call specified complexity. Let me give you a couple examples of what is meant by specified complexity. Feedback mechanism and interdependency. Feedback and interdependencies are examples of specified complexity. And specified complexity are hallmarks of good design. What we see in the living cell today is excellent engineering and design. In other words, life was created by an omnipotent creator. Let's see if we can figure out what we mean by complexity. Now, you're not going to believe this. I'm an old person. You can see that. When I was a little boy, I'm not kidding, people talked about the simple cell. Even when I began my college career in the there were still some folks that talked about the simplicity of the cell. We were figuring it out in the second half of the 20th century. But here's an actual diagram from one of my science books of the day. It was pretty simple. We thought we knew. You know, there's what's a cell? Well, it's a bag of protoplasm, and there's some, literally, I'm not kidding you. People talked about there was some junk floating around in the protoplasm, like the mitochondria. And there's the nucleus and a few other things like that. Today, we know a little better. 21st century science shows a fantastically complex machine. These are not like machines, they are machines. And they're far beyond any machine that we know about or are able to produce. Because the cellular machine can repair itself and reproduce itself. When we're talking about complexity, don't think of complexity as really just being a number of individual pieces, you know, like stacking up a bunch of dominoes. That's not complexity. A better example of complexity is a picture puzzle. Not only do you have a lot of pieces in a picture puzzle, but you know that those pieces need to fit together in a specified way. Which reminds me, my friends Zeb and Zeke, they threw a party. They invited all the friends over and said, we got to celebrate. We just did something great. So everybody got there, they were enjoying themselves, and finally somebody asked, hey, why are we celebrating? Zeb says, we just finally completed a very complex puzzle. Zeke says, yeah, it took us almost 8 weeks to do. And the folks were really impressed. They said, wow, well, how long was it supposed to take? Zeb said, I don't know, but the box said 3 to 5 years. If you take a look at the cell, take a look at the living cell, and just focus on any one of the hundreds or thousands of mechanisms in the cell, you will be blown away by the intricate specified complexity. Take something that you know about, aerobic respiration. How do you make energy? Well, you take glucose and oxygen, and then you have a process in your body that converts that into, carbon dioxide that you'll breathe out, water, and ATP, the energy currency of the cell. Well, that's the diagram that we see simplistically. Okay, it's actually, oh, look, it's a little more complex. This is just one of the many complex processes in a cell. You see there's a number of steps here. Let's just take a look at one of these substeps in more detail. This is the Krebs cycle. By the way, another of my mentors at Concordia University, Wisconsin, a scientific mentor, was Dr. Phil Arnhold, a brilliant biologist. Dr. Arnhold said, this is the proof of creation. The Krebs cycle. It is so intertwined, so complex, this can only have been created by a master engineer. And this is just one small aspect of a bigger thing of aerobic respiration, which is one small aspect of everything else that goes on in all the trillions of cells in your body. So biochemists out there or other scientifically minded folks, just investigate the Krebs cycle. You will see the brilliance of specified complexity and the absolute positive nature that a living, omnipotent engineer must have put this together in the first place. What's the interpretation again? Since life has the property of specified complexity, again, a living cell can repair and reproduce itself, feedback, interdependencies. Life was created by an omnipotent God who was a master designer. The other edge of the sword is it couldn't have happened by itself. But I just think it's better to phrase it in a positive sense. Usually at this point in time, we'd stand up, but, oh, I am wearing pants, by the way. You know how the standard Zoom thing is, but it's okay. You can stand up anytime because I can't see you. Evidence for life is more than chemistry. Now, don't let me get too excited. These next ones I'm going to have to hold back on because I have degrees in both computer science and chemistry. Life isn't just matter. Life is stuff. Remember the mechanism? God created life as matter, chemical compounds and elements. But it's also more. Life is more than just chemistry. The fact that life is more than just chemistry, I think, is one of the most obvious and also one of the most reasonable evidences for the creation model. One example. Many of you are familiar with this concept of chirality. A little bit of background in organic chemistry. Organic chemistry is just a name we give to chemical compounds that are based upon carbon. That's what makes up all the interesting things in our body. Chemical compounds, however, exist in 3 dimensions. They're actually spatial. And as it turns out, you can have the exact same chemical elements like carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, etc. But you can arrange them in different ways. And most carbon organic compounds will come in two different variants. For simplicity, we call them hands. There's the left hand and the right hand version. And just like your hand, they are identical in the sense that there's a thumb and four fingers and movements and wrists, etc. But they are not exact duplicates, right? We can't overlay them. They are instead mirror images of each other. This is called chirality. As it turns out, the amino acids, the chemical building blocks of the proteins that build everything else in your body, the amino acids in living things in your body are all of the left-handed variety. They're not of the right-handed variety. That seems surprising. Dr. A.E. Wilder Smith, brilliant Christian creationary scientist, said, "The surprise factor shows there was a designer." See, chemistry produces what a chemist calls racemic mixtures. If I wanted to produce an amino acid in the laboratory and dumped in the building blocks and stirred them together, I would get about half left-handed and about half right-handed. But as it turns out, in biological systems, in all the living cells of your body, they're only the left-handed variety. Let me illustrate this in another way. A colleague of mine at Concordia University, Dr. Scott Van Ornum. I wish I was smart. I know all these brilliant people. He's a brilliant biochemist. He worked in industry for a number of years, and one of his tasks was to synthesize ibuprofen. Many of you know what that is. It's both an analgesic, it relieves pain, and it's an anti-inflammatory, ibuprofen. Well, interestingly, when you dump the ingredients together and make ibuprofen, you get two different kinds. Now, to be effective, though, ibuprofen has to be just one of those kinds. So the cheap ibuprofen would have a mixture and it wouldn't be nearly as effective. But the good ibuprofen, by the way, the S structure, that's the sinister one, the left-handed one, that is responsible for the pain relief. And trying to separate these two was the task of Dr. Scott Van Ornum, and an extremely difficult task to do. Naturally, chemicals form a mixture, but in organic systems, there's only one kind. This is the unfortunate story of thalidomide. Some of you are familiar with thalidomide also, a drug that was rushed into use in Germany in the middle of the 20th century. Thalidomide was advertised to, especially for women, to reduce morning sickness, to be an anti-nausea, and to provide some sedative effects, which it did, but only in its right-handed form. Its left-handed form caused birth defects. And unfortunately, when thalidomide was administered, it was a mixture. Yes, the right-handed did the good stuff. The left-handed caused severe birth defects. Well, what's the interpretation of all this? Here's my positive spin, and I mean this in all sincerity. My evolutionary colleagues would say the following: how do you get life? You need matter, that's the M. You need time, that's the T. And then you need energy, that's the E. Matter plus time plus energy, that equals life. You know what? They're batting 750. At one time, I was a big baseball fan. I think I've probably given that up now. Dr. Heck is still a big baseball fan. We'll both tell you, nobody bats 3/4. Nobody bats 750. That's great. The problem with evolution is not so much that it's incorrect. The problem with evolution is it is incomplete. See, there's a missing ingredient. Yeah, life is matter. It exists in time. It uses and produces energy. The missing ingredient is I. What's I? That's information. That's teleonomy. And as we'll see in a little bit, information can only come from intelligence. So what's the interpretation? The fact that life is different from chemicals shows an intelligent cause for life. It's not just matter, time, energy by itself. It's matter, time, energy, information coming from intelligence that gives us life. Fifth evidence, probability. This is one that I would bet most of you, almost all of you, have heard about in the origins debate. It's oftentimes bandied about in various ways, especially, I know everybody's heard the anti-probability argument. The anti-probability argument goes like this. What are the odds that chemicals could randomly self-assemble into life? And then people throw out magic numbers like 10 to the minus 87th or other huge improbable numbers. In other words, what's the probability that this could form by itself? Let's turn that argument on its head. Oh, you've probably heard the corollary to this, right? Here's how I phrase this. If an infinite number of rednecks riding in an infinite number of pickup trucks fire an infinite number of shotgun rounds at an infinite number of highway signs, they will ultimately write the complete works of William Shakespeare in Braille. You've heard those arguments, right? The infinite typewriting monkeys, the alternate. Let's take this argument and spin it. You know what this is? Spin it. It was a joke. This is an artificial hummingbird. This is a brilliant piece of engineering. This is a hummingbird-sized, artificially controlled robot that moves, flies, hovers, does everything just like a robot does. Just like a hummingbird does. Wow, what a fantastic, brilliant, marvelous feat of engineering design. Ooh. Say, what are the odds that intelligent people created that wonderful mechanism? What kind of question is that? What are the odds? 100%. Absolutely, that's the point. What are the odds that an intelligent designer can create a complex machine? Answer, 100%. What are the odds that an omnipotent God can create complex cells? 100%. The probability argument is so much stronger, is rather than arguing about negative probabilities, we argue about positive probabilities. As a corollary to this, let me go back to the hummingbird first. You recognize the design here. Even if you don't know what all that's about, what are all those little things and how does it work, you recognize the design. My colleague, Dr. Danny Faulkner, and I were at the board meeting for the Creation Research Society a week ago. And in the conference room was this table. When we first looked at it, you can see that, hey, this leg here is bent. And we thought, what happened? Somebody sit on it? Did it get messed up? Why is it broke? But then when we looked more carefully, the table was completely stable. We knew that this was designed that way. We didn't know why, but we recognized the design. In a similar way, oftentimes we'll hear people say, well, why did God design things this way, creationary scientists? You know what? I don't know. What I can do with my intellect is I can recognize the fact of design, even if I don't know the why of design. We speculated this table was to allow us to put my right knee around there if I'm a right-handed person, but I really don't know. So what's the interpretation? Life was created by an omniscient God. Is it easy for an omniscient God to create a complex design tool? You bet. Okay, this one here, I really have to hold back on. This is my favorite origin evidence, information theory. Not only as a scientist, but especially as a computer scientist, I deal with information theory all the time. There'd be no such thing as any technological tool without information theory. Here's what information theory says in a nutshell. Intelligence is necessary to create information. Or information only comes from intelligence. In other words, there's a cause and effect relationship here. Intelligence is necessary to create information. Information can only come from intelligence. Do this thought experiment with me. Imagine you've just read a good book. You've just read this. One of my favorite authors is mid-20th century British author Dorothy Sayers. A classic book that influenced me was called The Mind of the Maker. When I was done reading that book, I said, what a great author. I've got to read more he or she wrote. After I said that, my friend Zeb turned to me and said, what do you mean author? I said, you know, the person that wrote that book. He said, what do you mean wrote that book? You know, where do you think the words came from here? And Zeb says, hey, did you ever meet the author of this book? I said, no, she died before I was born. Did you see her write this book? Do you know of it? Well, how do you know the book had an author? You didn't see it. You have no independent verification. There was no video evidence. That, of course, is unreasonable. The much more reasonable statement is, yes, books have authors. Why? Because of information theory. The information content of the book, the words, must have originated from an intelligent source. Information, the book, points to an intelligent cause, an author. Now, I have a signed poster by Chuck Norris. He sent me video messages, but I've never met him in person. The only reasonable conclusion, even though I didn't see Chuck write this book, is that he did. I know he had a ghost author too, but that's okay, right? Some intelligent human beings wrote the words down. The information in the book points to an intelligent cause. Some of you may know this. Chuck Norris doesn't read books. He stares them down to get the information he wants. Oh, the corollary? Chuck Norris doesn't write books either. The words assemble themselves out of fear. Well, of course, that's ridiculous. Books have authors. Information requires intelligence. Can I skip ahead before I do my second illustration? Question. Where did all the information content in a living cell come from? The only reasonable answer is intelligence. Let's say that we have no idea of where a computer came from. I dare say nobody here has actually seen or been involved in the manufacturing process of a computer. Well, there's some possibilities, right? We've never seen it happen. Maybe there's a natural law. Maybe that just naturally computers self-assemble. There's some kind of natural law of science like gravity that requires that computers are formed. You're saying, that seems unreasonable to me. Okay, maybe it's a chance, it's just a random occurrence. Computers don't have to self-assemble, but sometimes they just do. You're saying, no, that doesn't seem reasonable either. Could computers have been designed by intelligent designers? Yes, that is the reasonable interpretation. See, just like living cells, a computer is two things: hardware and software, the matter and the information. One without the other is unusable. And quite frankly, both of them together are often unusable too. But let's face it, there's no chance of that hardware doing anything worthwhile and meaningful without the informational instructions and the data provided by you as a user. A computer is two things: matter and information. Guess what? A living cell is also two things: matter and information. Here's something that is oftentimes confused by people. You see this little object? This is an object that my sainted mother gave me. In the 1980s, we were living in Oregon. In 1981, there was a volcano in southeastern Washington called Mount St. Helens. It erupted. It spewed ash all over the place. This little bear was crafted out of Mount St. Helens volcanic ash. Cool, right? Now imagine that you just stumbled across this in the wild. If you analyze this chemically, what you would discover, it is all natural, totally natural ingredients. It's all volcanic ash. I claim it's unreasonable to conclude that this had a natural origin just because it's made out of natural material. Don't confuse natural matter with natural origin. It's much more reasonable to conclude that this had an intelligent origin. Why? Because it conveys information. At the beginning here, we saw a little video clip by someone who noted the complexities of the cell, but just couldn't bring themselves to ascribe this complexity and this miracle to God. Let's see if I can, oh, yes. You would never know that I actually teach computer science. I am supposed to be, have things all set up beforehand. Okay. Hey, anybody know any good Chuck Norris jokes? Hang on, we're almost there. I want to show you just a couple-minute video clip out of the Expelled video series. Expelled was produced, 10 years or so ago. I need to jump ahead to, oops. Yeah, let's jump to, well, we'll start it here.
What is the cell now in terms of its complexity by comparison?
A galaxy.
If Darwin thought a cell was, say, a mud hut, what do we now know that a cell is?
More complicated than a Saturn V.
So what is in a cell as far as we know now?
a world that Darwin never could have imagined.
I needed someone who could give me a glimpse into this world. So we went to molecular biologist Doug Axe.
Think of a cell as being a nanofactory, a factory where on a very small scale, digital instructions are being used to make the components of the factory. Here we have the famous DNA double helix. You can see the two helical strands that are intertwined and wind around each other on the outside of the molecule. This is the material that stores all of our genetic information. In higher life forms, this will be the equivalent of something like a gigabyte of information stored in the molecules that form the individual chromosomes, all packed within the nucleus, which is a tiny fraction of the entire cell size. So what does DNA do? Well, the information in DNA ends up providing the information for sequencing the amino acids to make proteins. We have information in a one-dimensional form that provides the information for a three-dimensional form.
I'm finally just beginning to grasp the complexity of the cell. Are there systems within the cell that go well beyond Darwinian evolution? Some type of cellular technology that drives adaptation, replication, quality control, and repair? What if these new mechanisms have massive design implications? Well, I say, so be it.
I would say that a much more reasonable explanation for the cell, the origin of life, is a living God. Let me draw this to a close and say the following. There's nothing wrong with presenting negative evidences against evolution. There is a place for that. There is nothing wrong with pointing out the problems with evolution. I just believe that when we're talking one-on-one to an honest skeptic, it's much more fruitful and productive to present things in a positive sense. I believe it's more reasonable, and it actually makes a stronger argument. Let me point it this way. Again, back to one of my first mentors, Dr. John Saleska here. As a Lutheran, Dr. John Saleska was well versed in the two major themes of the Bible, law and gospel. And although this quote was originally written by C.F.W. Walther in his classic text, Law and Gospel, I think the first time it hit me between the eyes is when Dr. John Saleska mentioned it. Here's the quote from Walther. The law produces an effect opposite to that which it commands. The law produces an effect opposite to that which it commands. In other words, negative things produce the opposite effect. If you tell somebody, don't do this, what is their inclination? Exactly. Here's how Paul puts it in Romans. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. I can't even say it. Don't covet. So I want to covet. This is bad. I want to do it. Wouldn't it be better to phrase what we know, the truth of creation, in a positive sense? I think so too. Now, maybe the most important thing I can share is the reason for talking about origins and creation at all. The reason for talking about creation and origins is not to win arguments, not to influence people into a certain type of science. The only legitimate reason for talking about positive creation evidences is to point people to the Creator. One thing that science cannot do, but you and Scripture can do, is point people to the Creator Himself. And at that point, we have an even more marvelous story to share than just the original creation of life. We have the story of new life and eternal life. Thanks for coming along with me. It's been just a delight and pleasure to share some things with you. We do have a few minutes for questions and answers. I don't know if I'm going to impose on Dr. Heck to read the QA or other things he may have seen in the chat, or if he wants me to actually try to do both of these things. He's seen me walk and chew gum, so he knows I can't do both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
there was a question about the TEDx link, sharing that. So
oh, sure.
I answered it the way I thought, but I wanted you to know about it.
Sure. It's FedEx.com. No, I'm just kidding. The one that you are referring to there is, let's see. I don't know if you could see, it's on YouTube. It was a TED talk. By the way, TED Talk, I'm going to start can I editorialize now? Don't be too impressed with TED Talks. The vast majority of them do not have the correct worldview. Search for David Bolinsky. He's a medical animator, visualizing the cell. That's what you'll see there. If I break out of this, you can see the link. Maybe, okay. Does that help? Maybe I'll try to post that in the chat.
Yeah, or else put it up on our website.
Yeah, right. I hope that we can put things on the website at a certain point in time too.
A couple of additional questions. Is there a single slide with a list of all 6 evidences? Put all 6 into one slide?
Yeah, bad presenter. The answer is yes. It just hasn't been created by that person yet. Maybe he should do so.
Okay.
Okay. I will do that while you are doing some other one. How can I? Sorry.
The name of the biogenesis scientist, was that Bolinsky, or what was that name?
The one when I was talking about ibuprofen.
No, I think that was later. Biogenesis scientist. I think the one that did the video demonstration, but who was
oh, okay. Yes, the first one, the YouTube one, that was Bolinsky. He's not a scientist, but no problem there. He is a medical illustrator, and he did that animation.
And then there's a question about biochemist. I think that's your...
Yeah, Scott Van Ornum is the name there.
VAN space ORNUM.
That's correct.
Okay,
That's
Scott Van Ornum, and he would be also listed on the website of Concordia University, Wisconsin, in case somebody needs to be able to find that later.
Correct.
John Molitor asks, what 1 or 2 questions about the origins of life are you receiving most often from our young people coming out of our schools and into college?
You know, that's a great question. The origin of life is a very interesting topic because of the fact that evolutionary scientists do their best to ignore it. Darwin had a single paragraph. There are some that take it seriously, but there are just so many different roadblocks to the origin of life that I honestly don't get a lot of questions. Most people ask questions regarding what about this fossil find and what about hominids, and doesn't the age of the earth prove that things are old? But many evolutionary scientists are curiously silent about the origin of life.
Okay, there is another question about the biogenesis scientist. I guess it wasn't Belinsky. This is the one that in regard to ibuprofen.
Yes, yes. So that's my colleague, Dr. Scott Van Ornum here at Concordia University, Wisconsin.
Okay, that's VAN space. There you go. ORM.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh-huh. He was involved in the synthesis of ibuprofen.
All right. And I'm thinking I've gotten through all the questions. I also answered one. I gave my perspective on it, but I said you may have another idea. He says, David Black says, could not God have created life in other parts of the universe that we simply have not observed? If he did, it remains within reasonableness that God is not obligated to tell us about this.
Yes.
So
you're right. We could speculate in many different ways. I wonder if Dr. Heck talked about a theological aspect of what's revealed in Scripture, but could God have? Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, that's what I said too. He could have. I also commented, since I'm going to talk a little bit more about C.S. Lewis a little bit later on. Lewis once talked about the problem of sin in our world, and he said maybe the vast distances of the universe are God's method of quarantining the sin on this earth so that we don't contaminate other societies. If they're out there, they're pretty far away, and not in our lifetime will we come anywhere close to any of those, if in fact they do exist.
Right. Right. Yeah. Good. Yep. That's good.
Let's see. Do we have another one? I'm just looking at the Q&A. There's a question. Did you mention Sir William Thomas at the beginning of the lecture?
Yeah, I did not. Sorry. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I'm curious. Who is Sir William Thomas? Or
I cannot put my finger on it.
maybe
Yeah.
the individual who posted that, Chuck,
Sure.
posted that a couple of minutes ago, and there's always Google. I mean, we faculty use it almost as much as the students do, right? Okay.
But what I would like to do then, if it's okay with folks, is I would like to stop so I can get Kevin set up in 5 minutes here, since he'll be coming on in about 5 minutes. What I will do when I have a little break, if I can look through chat or the Q&A, I can try to respond to that. And yeah, obviously I can't do two things at once, but I can put the list of my 6 things together and post that somewhere for you. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, there are a couple other questions to get to, so let's just